I made a horror film for $0. Let me show you how. One camera, one lens, one light, one location, and one filmmaker showing you how to make a horror film for exactly $0. Can you make a good short film without any of the traditional luxuries of making a short film? We're about to find out. In this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how I made my new short horror film, Teddy Bear, utilizing the rule of one, with the most absolute minimalist setup and a budget of $0. My cheapest film ever. As prep, you can watch the full short film here and it's linked in the description. For this making of video, you'll see the ways I leveraged what I did have, the tricks I used to work around my limitations, and how you can do exactly the same thing to make a high quality short film regardless of being a broke little bitch. For this project, I was actually filming it over the Christmas break period with my family, which made things even more difficult because it meant that whatever gear I used, I would have to fit inside a single suitcase, an airline friendly camera bag that couldn't weigh more than 20 kg. This was one of the most difficult conundrums. What could I take? What should I take? And how was it going to fit next to my spare underwear and socks? I mean, do I really need spare underwear and socks? Ultimately, I decided on using my Sony a7 IV. This camera is compact, it's reasonably affordable, you can film in high quality 4K video, and you have the ability to crop in on your image without losing quality, which was an important advantage, which I'll come back to later. It also has image stabilization, which was also going to be important for the way in which I chose to film. I used the Poco Mofage E to PL mount adapter. This was required for the PL lens I was going to use. It also has built-in ND filters, which means that I have the ability to control how much light I'm letting into the sensor very quickly when I need to adjust this from shot to shot. And this helps me maintain a consistent shallow depth of field while filming. For the lens, I use the new Blazer 33mm anamorphic lens. Now, this is not the perfect combination with the Sony because the Sony doesn't allow for open gate recording or any kind of anamorphic de-squeeze modes, which means that when you de-squeeze the image, you lose a lot of resolution. But because the a7 IV is downscaling from a 7K sensor, some would argue that the image is sharp enough that this trade-off is acceptable. My other option would have been used to use my Blackmagic 6K full frame to truly make the most of the 1.5 times anamorphic look from the Blazer lens, but I just could not justify the additional size and weight that camera would require for my luggage, so I went with the Sony. I also used a Blackmagic Pro Mist 1/8 filter to add to the front of the lens to further take away some of Sony's digital sharpness. For my light, I used the Godox FL150S flat panel light with the softbox and grid. I chose this light because it's very flexible. You can mount it almost anywhere and it will provide you nice soft light. It's lightweight and folds up perfectly for luggage restrictions, and it's bi-color, which means you can change its color temperature to suit the mood of your scene, which would also be important later on. Now that covers my one camera, one lens, and one light. But I did bring a couple of extras. I managed to fit in my Aperture 60D spotlight to use as a more compact option than the flat panel, which I powered using the SmallRig MPF batteries. And I did also bring my Aperture MC light and my Godox TL30 light tube. Yes, technically that's 4 lights, but these don't count because this is my YouTube video and it's not yours. The other essential item I bought as part of my camera setup was the Small HD 7-inch monitor to allow me to properly monitor the anamorphic image. And because this is a manual lens, the SmallRig F60 manual follow focus. I also used the standard Sony EXM XM1 shotgun microphone on the camera. Now I did plan to record additional audio using a lavalier with the Rode Wireless Pro microphones, but we never actually used that method of audio recording. I now had all the equipment. It fit in my suitcase. Barely. We'd traveled down to my parents', and more importantly than any gear, I just needed one good idea to fit my rule of one principle for this film.
All I need is an idea.
In fact, when you are low budget filmmaking, a good idea isn't enough. You need a good idea which can fit within your resources, and as we mentioned, technically, we had no resources. So the first question any indie filmmaker asks themselves, what can we beg, borrow, or steal? So first, I went prop hunting in my parents' house. Looking for inspiration, I went through my old closet and found this Halloween mask and costume plus one skeleton glove.
Got my beautiful wife. And as you can see, my beautiful wife is waiting in the corner.
I couldn't find the other one, which ironically was an outfit I had originally used in my very first short film 25 years ago. 25 years ago. And if you want to feel old, just remember Taylor Swift turns 75 this year. I also discovered my sister had bought this ridiculously oversized teddy bear for my nephew Jack. This little tent I also thought could make an interesting prop in the film if we found the right moment to use it. Inspiration was beginning to form. These could be our key props, of which would become the basis for our story. But what about location and cast? Well, my nephew had an interest in filmmaking and he already had a cameo playing a younger version of me in one of my previous YouTube videos. So Jack would be the star of the film, despite not being an actor and barely having any on-screen experience. Did I mention he's also 7? This gave us a great excuse to use his room, which would be our one location. Now, if you were to see this room in real life, you would almost think it had been fully dressed for filming, that the art department had just built a child's room set and readied it for this shoot. But that's just his room. The kid has a lot of toys, and that made it visually perfect for filming in because we didn't have to change anything. Almost any angle we used was visually interesting. There was always something going on in the background. This is one of the key aspects of making your film look cinematic and professional. It's not about what camera you use. It's about the environment you put the camera in. Does it feel believable? Does it feel lived in? Does it create its own world? Great looking films feature great looking production design, locations, and set dressing. Whether that's something that you've created or something that already exists. In this case, the environment was there, we just had to step into it. Adding on to this, we also found this costume, Jack's night outfit. Again, just something he had already bought for a dress-up party or Halloween or something that really stood out visually and made his look more interesting. Jack also had this large, almost walk-in closet in the corner of his room, which I knew we could find a way to utilize because, well, you know what lives in closets. Monsters. I mean, every kid knows that. From our cast, our location, our costume, and our key props, I could start to put together a concept about a monster living in a little boy's closet and how that monster would come to life to terrorize him. Is this the most original idea in the world? No. But will it leverage everything I have at my disposal? Yes. And can I find a way to put a little original spin on the concept? I hope so. So, one evening I put down a little script outline of what I wanted to shoot. It should be important to note that at this stage I didn't really know my ending. I didn't know how to tie in the teddy bear, and I hadn't figured out some of the pivotal scary moments. But I hoped as we began to film, inspiration would hit me. Now, if you're less experienced than me, then don't wait for inspiration to arrive as you film. Really try and find it beforehand. But for the purposes of time, I'm going to hope it all comes together and ignore the three most important aspects of a film: the script, and the script. Don't be like me. Now, because Jack was not an experienced actor, I decided to effectively tell a story without dialogue. It's much easier to get an organic, natural performance from an actor when you don't expect them to talk, especially working with a child, as their imagination can make them very expressive, but their ability to deliver lines might be less convincing. This was also a practical choice. If I don't have dialogue, I don't need to worry so much about audio, and I don't need to set up the wireless microphone, and that gives me one less technical thing to worry about and manage while I'm on set. If you spend all your time working on the technical requirements of the film, you better believe your creative inspiration is going to suffer. The next practical choice was to film everything handheld. Firstly, my lightweight tripod was slow and cumbersome to set up. It doesn't give me the kind of pan and tilt options a larger tripod would. So while it's great for travel, it's not great for making a short film, especially when your cast doesn't really understand the concept of hitting his marks. To allow Jack to perform and act freely, and to allow me to do quicker setups in shorter time, I opted to go handheld for almost the entire film, except for a couple of shots where we placed the camera on the floor or in the closet. This helped me set up angles much quicker, which meant my star got less bored and we could film at a faster pace. This is also why using the Sony a7 IV was very helpful due to the image stabilization it has, which along with the weight of my camera rig kept everything feeling not too shaky, not too handheld. The next advantage of the Sony a7 IV is its crop mode shooting, allowing you to punch in on its sensor and get a super 35mm field of view. Because I only had one lens, I used this crop mode often to essentially get a 50mm lens along with my 33mm lens. This crop mode gives me two anamorphic lenses for the price of one, without having to swap lenses and without really losing any image quality. This was a great shortcut which I often utilized when I needed to get just a little bit closer than what the full frame mode would allow. It's a very fast way to change focal lengths without changing lenses. So if you only have one lens, this can be a great help if your camera has this feature. Now to the lighting for the film, which was very simple. You can see these two practical lights in the room. Essentially what I did was design all the lighting setups around those two practicals, so that it always suggested that the light was coming directly from them, or from Jack's torch when he enters the closet. This is why having practical lights in your set is really helpful, because it gives you motivated lighting points, aka which direction and placement you put your own lights to match where those practical lights are, so that when we, the audience, watch the film, we understand how the world is lit. That lighting is consistent with how the practical lights within it are placed, and therefore the lighting feels believable and immersive. As you can see, most of the time I was simply using the Godox flat panel at about 10% intensity, dialing the Kelvin temperature to about 4000 to give it the same hue as the practical lamplight, and then bouncing it off the wall so the room would feel like it was lit by the practical lights, while not feeling overly lit as if I had movie lighting assisting the shots. I would shift the panel around the room closer or further away depending on the setup and where Jack was in relation to his practical lamp. Unfortunately, neither of my lights really worked to create this shadow effect on the wall, so I just ended up taking the practical lamp and pointing it at my partner who was playing the closet monster. As you can see, she only ever has one hand visible because we couldn't find that other skeleton glove, so we kept the other hand concealed. This is what you call movie magic, folks. The only times I used anything more than the main light was for the tent sequence, and also to film inside the closet, as bringing the large light in, no matter how dim it was set to, always seemed to make the closet overly bright. So this is where we use the Aperture MC and that little Godox light tube, and we set the color to a blue temperature to a RGB blue temperature to suggest the light was actually coming from Jack's torch bouncing off the walls, as you can see here. Now, whenever I wasn't behind the camera, we had to get a little bit creative, particularly with these closet shots where I was controlling the teddy bear sneaking up behind Jack. So what we did is fit the camera into this shelving section, and I would set the focus, and then Jack would step into frame. He would look at the monitor beside the camera to see that he was in the right place and also in focus, and then I would raise the teddy up behind him. This did take quite a lot of takes to truly get right, but is a great example of working around your limitations to get the shot. It's also a good note for when you're manually pulling focus. Sometimes it's easier, quicker, and smarter to have your actors walk into focus when they hit their mark, rather than trying to follow them into their mark with multiple focus points. As the director, cinematographer, gaffer, and production designer, it was important for my own sanity to try and keep things simple. This meant that we would try and film scenes in chronological order. That way, we wouldn't run into lots of different continuity errors that I was too busy to notice. Shooting in order can also be helpful when you're working with children, so they understand where they are in any given scene and can perform organically because they understand the logical progression of the scene taking place. When you film everything out of order, it can be very confusing to an inexperienced performer to truly understand what part of the story they're meant to be in, and ultimately lead to them giving a worse performance due to this confusion. This chronological shooting was also helpful because it meant Jack's costume was either him wearing his night outfit or him just wearing his pajamas, so it was very easy to keep track of. So if you don't have someone keeping track of continuity, avoid the opportunity to make mistakes and film everything in order. It also helps me keep track of where I am and not miss critical shots because I'm bouncing between scenes. I also had a rough shot list to refer back to, but for the most part, it stayed in my back pocket for most of the day. A lot of the sequences we added to or improvised as we filmed, and this was ultimately how I came up with the ending and tied it back into the teddy bear, who is working in tandem with the closet monster, probably because he's tired of getting beaten up by Jack. At least that was my logic, and that is how I discovered my original little twist on this well-worn concept. And just to show you another little trick we utilize, we're actually using two different closets. Whenever we see Jack, we're in his room by his own closet. Whenever we see what's inside the closet, we're in a closet in another room that has more space in it to put the closet monster and set up some extra lighting. We connect these two shots through Jack himself interacting across the two shots, which subconsciously makes us believe he's in the same place for both of them, when in fact they are shot in two separate times across 2 different days. Does this count as a second location? Well, of course not, because this is my YouTube video and I make all the rules. The process for production would be that I set up the lights to film a shot, then I would lay out for Jack how to perform and explain what I needed for him to do, then rinse and repeat.
And now just imagine you're watching the monster. You're watching it slowly come out of the closet. And the monster is slowly coming out now.
In between takes, I would guide him to do certain things to adjust his performance, and I would often talk through takes, giving him acting cues, knowing that I would replace the audio later on. Despite keeping the lighting to a minimum, shooting handheld, only having one location, creating a script entirely without dialogue, it still took us about 3 7-hour days to complete filming. You have to understand that if you're going to wear every hat and have to do every job, and you're doing say 6 jobs, then it's going to take you 6 times longer to do the same thing it might take a crew of 6 to do. If you take this one-man band approach, always allocate yourself more time than you think you'll need. Now, one other tip for those who are using non-actors or children in their film is that a performance can always be manipulated by the edit. There's the famous editing example done with the same person's reaction cut against different things, known as the Kuleshov effect, Kuleshov effect, Kuleshov effect. Anyway, whatever it's called, each time you see the reaction, you associate a new emotion in conjunction with what he is presumably seeing. We are subconsciously reading into the performance a different reaction based on the edit. This is an important lesson. It means that we can manipulate a performance through our edit to give it more weight. This is particularly important when you are working with inexperienced actors. Through the edit, you can create the tension by speeding up or slowing down a scene and their performance, hanging on a look they do, or deciding to trim it right down so we don't see it. But if you want to have the greatest ability to do this, you will need to film more coverage, aka the amount of different camera angles you use to create a scene. The more coverage or camera angles you have, the more you can play with and adjust the performance through using them. The less coverage you have, the more difficult it will be to influence the performance in the edit. This is why we see a lot of coverage in horror films, because each angle can help to create the tension and suspense. So in this case, I filmed a lot of coverage to ensure I could adjust the scene as I saw fit in the edit and help assist Jack's performance through making the most of that coverage. Remember, an editor never saw extra coverage they didn't like. And guess what? If you want to keep your film to $0, you're the editor. One final note on the production part of this process. We tried to use the closet monster very sparingly. This is called the power of suggestion. By only seeing the monster a lot of the time from Jack's point of view and showing the shadow on the wall, we're trying to avoid revealing that the closet monster is in fact my pregnant wife wearing a 25-year-old rubber mask and one skeleton glove. To maintain the illusion of the film, we have to limit how often we see the monster, and more specifically, we have to limit how we see the monster, what angle, and for how long. This is where the curtains of the tent help us hide how cheap the monster looks. Notice there are no close-ups of this monster, and you only ever truly see it properly from a distance or in the darkened closet. This is all using the power of suggestion to conceal the film's lack of budget and resources. There is a famous saying in script writing, show, don't tell. But when you're working on low-budget films like this and you want to keep the illusion of your story strong, there should be another saying, suggest, don't show. It's better to see a creepy shadow on the wall than it is to see a fake-looking monster costume right in front of us. So utilize the power of suggestion to maintain a sense of believability. After some pretty intense days of filming, I handed the project over to Sam, my editor, for him to put together. Unfortunately, this is where we encountered a new problem. The film kind of sucked. Looking at the first draft of the film, that all too familiar depression sunk in. While it was overly long, that wasn't the main problem. Fundamentally, it just didn't work. It felt cheesy and inauthentic. Now again, the first draft of your film always sucks. This is a filmmaking rule, but determining why it sucks can be a difficult problem. Does it suck because it sucks? Or does it suck because you haven't found the right way to put it together? Can you unsuck it?
Oh, let's get ready to suck it!
It wasn't what I imagined the film would be, but it never is. So it was very hard to put a finger on exactly why it wasn't working. Fortunately, the breakthrough came in the second draft where Sam stripped all the music out of the film and concentrated much more heavily on maximizing the sound design and sound effects. Suddenly, the tension and timing worked much better, and with several minutes trimmed from the runtime, the film came to life. This is another example of how less can often be more. With the music track constantly inserting itself into the action, the story felt forced and contrived. The music was telling the audience how they should feel in such an obvious and over-the-top way that it was off-putting. When that music was stripped away, it felt more believable. It was a simple switch up that left the new version of the film in a much better place. Taking out the horror music made the film feel more like a horror film. Remember, you do not have to spell everything out to the audience. The power of suggestion can be used in many areas of your film, including its music. A subtle, understated approach often works better. Remember to give your audience enough credit to let them connect the dots themselves. To source all of the sound effects and additional music required for the film, we went to Artlist, which now has a massive library of both music and sound effects and even stock footage. In fact, we forgot to get an external shot of the house before I left, so I sourced this one from Artlist to open the film. Artlist is a fantastic resource for filmmakers, and I have been signed up with Artlist since 2016. Now that they include sound effects and stock footage, they are basically a one-stop shop for anyone looking to finish up post-production on their films with good audio. This is where we added creaking doors, demonic groans, howling wind, and a few carefully placed music stings to help our story. If you're interested in Artlist, use my discount code in the description for 2 months free. The final touches on the project were just to add a couple of visual effect augmentations to the last 2 shots. Luckily, Sam, being a visual effects whiz, was able to put these shots together in only a few hours. These additions weren't necessarily required, but they just added a tiny touch more impact to the film's ending. I then did a basic grade in DaVinci Resolve using the Dehancer plugin. I've talked about Dehancer before as an amazing tool which provides film emulation looks to your image, matching different types of film stock. This is a process I often apply to my work, as I fundamentally dislike the digitally sharp images, particularly coming from Sony cameras like the a7 IV. Running the image through Dehancer, I basically get to dirty up my image, adding things like film grain, halation, and bloom. In this case, I went with the Kodak Ultramax 400 film stock, and I just tried to bring down some of the light levels in the room to fit with the concept of the room being lit by lamplight. I'm sure this is not to everyone's taste, but I like the thickness and grit it provides the image. But again, I am most definitely not a color grader, so take my opinion and my grade with a grain of film stock. If you can't afford Dehancer, there is a new plugin in DaVinci Resolve Studio called Film Creator. It offers similar film emulation style options, but it's much more limited in the different looks you can create. And there you have it. One camera, one lens, one light, almost. One location, one short horror film, $0 spent doing. Take a simple concept, execute it well, work around your limitations, and get out and make your film. Remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you make a movie. Sometimes it's just getting in reps, practicing your craft, and not mortgaging your house as you do it. If you want more tips on how to make films and documentary projects, click on the link beside me. Of course, you can watch my feature films now streaming for free on Amazon and Tubi, and links will also be in the description. But if you want more personal specific advice on how to go about making your own film, book a one-on-one consultation through the link in the description. As always, I am the Savage Filmmaker, and I'll see you when I see you.